all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie and welcome to Booksmart. Since we have come to the end of 2023, today's episode will review the books I read this year. I will only review books that I created Booksmart episodes for, and these will not include Throwback Thursday episodes since I did not first read them in 2023. Because Booksmart didn't premiere until summer, I will only do a top 6 books for the year since I only have about 6 months worth of episodes. This was more difficult than I had anticipated. When I listed off all my Booksmart episodes, trying to figure out 6 and their hierarchy was troubling. I guess I'm not one of those people who can readily list favorites. It was much easier to name the books I didn't like or those that were disappointing, but to narrow down the rest into the top 6 proved challenging. I took into consideration how much I learned from the books, since that is my goal at Booksmart. Books that taught me much, made me think of the world differently, or those that I felt would have a positive impact on society if more people read them, those were the books that found a spot on my top 6 of 2023. And I didn't just learn from the books. Creating the Booksmart episodes also enlightened me. Before I started Booksmart, I would ponder the book by myself. I didn't have anyone to discuss the books with. But thinking can be a passive activity at times. I didn't do anything else with the book. I simply placed it in my office closet on top of the last book I had just read, the stack that would be going to the used bookstore, and then selected my next book from the cabinet near my nightstand. Now when I finish a book, I do something with it, which further cements the book's impact on my thinking and maybe even my behavior. Then researching information for my kitty cat pop-ups gave me even more to ponder, which I will touch upon as I count down my favorites of 2023. And let me apologize in advance for having to use paper printouts of most of the books. As you may already know, I do not keep many books. I have one antique-looking bookshelf. I don't like keeping things just for the sake of keeping them, so 95% of the books I read, I bring to the local used bookstore where I trade them in for book credit so I can read even more books in the hopes of getting just a little bit smarter. So, let's get started. Number 6, Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s by Tom O'Neill. Chaos made the cut because it kept me reading and I couldn't wait to find out more since the book gave me a lot of new information even though I already knew a lot about the Manson murders and the 60s. Despite its length, I didn't want it to end. Chaos is about Charles Manson and all those discrepancies surrounding him and the people he knew. O'Neill also questions Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor in the Manson murders, and shatters the narrative that we've been told about Charles Manson. While the ending was a bit disappointing simply because we never reached any certifiable conclusions as to all those discrepancies, the book made you think. It gave us an intriguing link between Jack Ruby and Charles Manson with a potential CIA mind control experiment. It made us question what exactly goes on with all those Hollywood actors and connections and cover-ups. And it once again shows how our legal system is less about facts and truths and more about stories and lies. Chaos gave me much more to talk about and think about for days, which is one of the qualities I look for in a book. And from my pop-ups, I learned that 1 in 20 criminal cases result in a wrongful conviction, that smoking gun was popularized during Watergate, and according to Paul McCartney, Helter Skelter was about a playground slide of all things. Chaos deserved a spot in my countdown. Number 5, 30-something at 30, an oral history by Scott Ryan. I had to put this one on the list because it's 30-something. Even though it didn't give me a ton of new information, I love the format of the book, giving background information on each of the 85 episodes. The book also prompted me to rewatch the series, which I hadn't done for probably 7 or 8 years. It's a niche book. If you never watch the series, the typical reader is not going to read this book, but I still think it has value for anyone who wants to write, for anyone who wants to direct, for anyone who wants to be a part of the creative process for a television show. And I learned from the book as well how crappy we are at communicating and listening, and it reinforced my insistence that the best fiction stems from nonfiction, that our fictional ideas come from our very real lives. I adore reading books about the creative process behind TV shows or movies or even music videos. They always inspire me to create. When I created my Booksmart episode for 30-something, I also learned that Edward Zwick directed my beloved Legends of the Fall. Fish do have personalities, and only 307 phone booths still exist. Number 4, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. First of all, I realized how few memoirs I read this year. If anyone asks me what I read, I usually reply with mostly memoirs. That is incorrect. Out of the 15 Booksmart episodes I created on books I was currently reading, only 3 would be fully classified as memoirs. 3 or 4 more could have been possibly categorized as such, but they were more essay-oriented with less overall narrative structure. Perhaps I've already used and read enough memoirs to last me a lifetime. The reason Know My Name made my list was for its eloquence in articulating rape. Miller's writing shows her confusion, her trauma, her disorientation in a world that no longer looks the same as it did before. Miller's courage in revealing her name and publishing her victim statement opened the door for victims of sexual assault. Her bravery is inspiring in spite of a judicial system that seems more concerned with protecting the rapist than advocating for victims. She inspired me to share my own story on my Booksmart episode, where I also learned women blame other women for sexual assault when alcohol is involved, that the word victim is ambiguous in our legal system, and that social media lowers empathy and compassion. Know My Name easily made the list. Number 3, The Story Paradox: How Our Love of Storytelling Builds Societies and Tears Them Down by Jonathan Gottschall. Books that leave me with a lot to think about, the kind where you can immediately apply into daily life, those are my favorites. The Story Paradox does just that. It can be frustrating living in our polarized society right now. Sometimes it feels as though we are just months away from becoming the Handmaid's Tale or 1984. Gottschall sheds light on why that is, how our storytelling rules the world, for better or for worse. He doesn't shy away from covering the whole picture, which includes the extreme right to the extreme left, both the likes of Trump and the woke culture. He builds the foundation for our storytelling society, beginning with Plato and how those stories had influenced not just our thinking, but our way of life. The Story Paradox was a fascinating read, one that doesn't just make you feel smarter, but gives you the ability to test out such theories in your life at any given moment, since we are bombarded with stories everywhere we look. You not only think differently about what you're reading or watching, but how what you're reading and watching impacts you. Just how does this information alter our reality, and how do we engage with it? Not only was the Story Paradox well written and thoroughly researched, but it's applicable right now in our lives. When I created my Booksmart episode, I learned a ton of fun stuff. Plato was wallpaper cleaner, print newspapers is still a $7 billion industry, Hitler was woozy over an autopsy, he witnessed and refused to eat meat thereafter, flat earthers think NASA guards the cliffs so people don't fall off, die-hard Fox News watchers quickly became die-hard CNN watchers after a simple experiment that had them watch CNN instead of Fox News, Glenn had an obituary in the newspaper, others thought Joffrey looked like Nellie long before I did, and most importantly, animals are more moral than humans. I learned a lot from the Story Paradox. Number 2, John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed, Essays on a Human-Centered Planet. This book holds a special place in my heart. It's the reason I started Booksmart. After I read this book of Green's personal essays about our human-centered planet, I needed to talk to somebody about it. It prompted so many discussions, from Diet Dr. Pepper to cave drawings to teddy bears and the yips, something I knew nothing about. I enjoyed Green's wit and reflection. I love the personal essay books that could be classified as memoirs, yet there's a little bit of research thrown in, my favorite combination of personal experiences and historical information. Adding Green's storytelling, and it's a no-brainer that the book is well worth the read. This is the kind of book that inspires me to write, to look at the stuff around me more carefully, and then make more sense out of it, which sometimes is simply being more grateful and appreciative of the smaller things in life. During my research, I found out that 85% of textiles end up in the dump, which changed the way I shop because it bothered me so much. On a happier note, I learned that squirrels make mushroom jerky, and raft and waddle are terms for groups of penguins, depending upon if they are on land or in water. I almost kept this book, almost, but I decided to pass it on to someone else to read. Before I reveal my number 1 book of 2023, here are some honorable mentions. Pathological, the true story of 6 misdiagnoses by Sarah Fay, for its information on the DSM and how mental illnesses are diagnosed, misdiagnosed, or based on trends. And Wild Ones, a sometimes dismaying, weirdly reassuring story about looking at people, looking at animals in America by John Whalen, for its unique focus and its intriguing perspectives on animal conservation. Now, for my number 1 book of 2023. The 90s by Chuck Klosterman. This book I decided to keep, at least for now. I'm biased with the 90s because that's when I graduated both high school and college. I have an excellent memory of it and lived through it. I could agree with Klosterman on his thoughts about Kurt Cobain, politics, and technology, but disagreed with him on his thoughts about O.J. Simpson's Bronco chase. He gave me much to ponder in relation to my memory, that it's not as accurate as I thought. The 90s also represents the kinds of books I appear to have gravitated to. Essay books that have less memoir components and more research, societal, and or historical components. It's a snapshot of a decade in history that captures the big events and smaller, seemingly insignificant ones that maybe weren't as unimportant as we thought, like how we just brushed the Clinton and Lewinsky scandal aside. I wish these were the types of books that were used in schools more often to enhance our curriculum, do away with the dry, boring textbooks, which is another reason I chose this as my #1 book of 2023. Other than pop sonnets and confessions of a prairie bitch, the 90s Booksmart episode was fun to create using news footage. I learned Blockbuster was the name of a World War II bomb, that the infamous white Bronco from the chase now sits in a museum between Ted Bundy's bug and Dillinger's getaway car, and that Billy Joe complained so much about the pop-up version of Keep the Faith that VH1 pulled it from airing. And those were the days. So there you have it. My favorite books I read in the second half of 2023. If you had to pick your top books of your 2023 reading list, what would make the cut? Let me know in the comments below. Overall, I learned a lot in 2023. I will continue to broaden my world with the books I'll read in 2024. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.